Hey everyone, this is Lisa with LisaListen.com and the blog Are You My Cousin? And today we're getting ready to start our Facebook Live, and I have just lost my co-host with me today. So hang on one second, guys. We'll kind of chat as you come in. Let me know. Give me a thumbs up. Maybe tell me where you're from or something. That way I know that as you join me, then I know that you are hearing what I have to say and that everything's working okay on my end, because I just lost. Let's see here. Let me try and bring my guest, Jenny, back on. Jenny, can you hear me? Because we have lost your camera. Hang on, guys. Talk amongst yourself real quick. Let me see if I can get Jenny back on here. Let's see. Okay. Oh, there she is. Yay. Okay, guys. Now it's me. And I have Jenny Hansen with me. Jenny is a genealogist out of Utah, and she specializes in Scandinavian research, which is something I know nothing about. That particular area of research. We were talking, it's a little nichey, but that's okay, because we have lots of folks who are researching such a wide variety of ethnic groups in our Facebook page, that having somebody who can talk about the Scandinavian naming patterns will be very helpful. All right, guys, as you come in, as I said, if you don't mind just giving me a thumbs up or something, let me know that you are hearing me okay, that everything is running well. I confess, as we were doing a little testing, our platform was a little glitchy. So if it gets a little glitchy, just bear with us, and we will just keep moving forward, and we may repeat a few things. So as you can see, I've got Jenny next to me here on the screen. Jenny, hey, thank you so much for coming, Jenny. I really appreciate you being here with us.
Thanks for the invitation, Lisa. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. Guys, this was very last minute, and so the way Jenny and I we met at Roots Tech, actually crossing the street, going back to our hotel after our very first day of Roots Tech. Yeah. She gave me a fabulous dinner recommendation.
Well, thank you.
And so we kept running into each other over the time, and got to chatting, and I really enjoyed getting to know her. She has a BA in family history and genealogy. She's an accredited Danish researcher, and she does work currently as a professional research. And she has her own website called myfavoriteancestor.com, and I will put a link to that into the comment section when we get done with today's Facebook Live. So that's Jenny, and I'm so glad that she's here. Interesting enough, and many of you know, and I really appreciate all of your well wishes on the recovery from my hand surgery. And as I actually shortly, just days after surgery, Jenny had actually emailed me and said, "Do you ever want somebody to guest post on your blog?" Well, I'm like, yes, please. Because she can type with two hands, and I was only typing with one at that point. So that's how all of this came about. We're happy that she was able to join us today. So this week's latest blog on the post is about Scandinavian naming patterns. And obviously, Jenny wrote that for us. And so I wanted to talk about that this afternoon. Now, for those of you listening who do not have Scandinavian ancestors, that is fine. Stick with us, because the concept of using naming patterns within an ethnic group that you're researching is going to be helpful to your research. And I think you still can pick up some valuable tips as we go through this and as we talk about this today. So, Jenny,
yes,
on those Scandinavian ancestors, can you just give us kind of a general overview again of how that works, of how that naming pattern works?
Sure. So the first thing we want to talk about with naming patterns in Scandinavia is this idea of patronymics. And this is what a lot of people, it like blows their mind when they first get going on Scandinavian research. They think, I don't even know what surname I'm trying to follow, because it seems like it changes every generation. Mm-hmm. And that's true. So the way that these work is that a father's given name is used as the surname for the children, and either son or daughter is attached to the end of it.
Wow. That's a real different way of looking at it.
So let's say for your name is Christian. Sons would all be whatever Christian's son, and the daughter would be Christian's daughter. So the thing that throws everyone off is that we try, in most of our research today, we try to follow any given, the surname, we try to follow that throughout time. Where here we're trying to match a surname with a father's given name with a father's surname and back and forth like that. So it kind of switches every generation as to what the surname is going to be. And yet through all of this, we can see a steady pattern and a strong link to the family.
Oh, wow. So it really is looking at things just at there's a system to it. You just have to adjust your thinking. If you've been doing US based research, if you track that Scandinavian line.
Yes. And one of these things too, is it's not specific to Scandinavia. There's a lot of places.
Oh, hang on. We lost you again, Jenny.
Over the world that use patronymic. A few in Europe that come to mind for me right off is like in Scotland.
Oh,
you there, Lisa?
Yeah, just there. It froze on me. Okay, can you start that again? Okay. Can you? Okay. Sorry, guys. I actually think that might be the platform today. Seems to be a little glitchy because everything else is checking out. Again, so as we talk about other countries that might use that patronymic.
Yes. So places like Wales does a lot with patronymics, and Scotland does a lot with patronymics. And then, of course, when you get into Asia and all that, there's very different naming patterns there. But this is something that we see throughout Western Europe.
I actually did not realize Scotland and Wales did that patronymic. I knew it was a little different than what I was used to, but I just haven't done enough research there. And so back to Scandinavia for a second. When you talk Scandinavia, what does that include? Which countries? Because people might not be sure of that.
Oh, so I just had to blog about this people. So we have in Scandinavia, it means that Scandinavian, which Denmark comes in there too, because they're all just right there. They share this very similar culture, similar language. A lot of things are a lot the same there. But when we talk about, say, the Nordic countries, that expands the area a bit to include Finland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, all of those extra things that sometimes we think that's Scandinavia, but when we're really looking at the cultural and language similarities, it's Denmark, Norway, and Sweden.
Okay. That's what I was wondering about. I didn't realize the difference between thinking Nordic versus Scandinavian. I guess I had assumed they were the same or synonymous with that. That makes sense.
And Finland is unique. The language is very different than the other Nordic countries, but there were long time periods when when Sweden's in control, but when Finland is doing other stuff, it just doesn't match up.
Yes, and that's true with the Finnish thing, because the Finnish language is actually, I think, just comes out of Estonia or something like that. Many years ago. So
it's more Eastern European.
Yes. So Debbie had a question in the group. She said, I don't know, actually, I'm not sure, Jenny, if you can even see the comments. We were talking about the patronymic naming system, naming pattern. She said before 1850, right? What is?
Yes. Okay. So that's a good point to bring out. So through all three of these countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, they practice this patronymics like from forever ago, clear up, and then around the mid 1800s, just to kind of keep things more streamlined. The policy was phased out, and each country kind of had their year that by this year we need to stick with one surname. And sometimes phased out that you will see in a parish, there's definitely been a hard line when the priest said no more. So I've had a family where the older children had the father's patronymic surname on there, and then the younger children are keeping a family surname. So it is an interesting one. You just have to really pay attention in those records, and you can figure out who belongs to whom.
So could somebody at that time period when they were changing over, did somebody's name actually change, or was it just say within the family, a child's name might be this, and then if they were born after this year, the child's name, all the children's name?
The second is the case, that up to a certain point, and then they just would stick with the name. So for example, if the father's name was, we'll just pull one out of my family, Simon Peterson, the older children might have Simonson as the surname, and then the younger children, it would be Peterson to match what the father had.
Okay.
And then from there on, that Peterson would be passed on in perpetuity.
Was it consistent? I know sometimes when they made that change, was it fairly consistent by such and such date? You know that was happening, or was it kind of phased in? In other words, does the researcher have to really use other resources to make sure they've got the right person?
No, it was cut more phased in. Sometimes again, you see a hard, fast line, but it is pretty clear what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was kind of what I was like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know how to. So, well, and then the naming patterns aren't, for those of us, when you talk about naming patterns, it's not just Scandinavian and like Wales or the patronymics.
Correct.
Apparently, naming patterns go across really the world, it seems like, when you're talking about that. One quick question. Debbie wanted to follow up on that. She said, and the family exists and enters different parishes. Does that make sense to you?
Ooh, say that one more time.
She said, and the family exists and enters different parishes.
As far as when the name became like a consistent surname?
I don't know. Hey, Debbie, can you type in a clarification on that for us so we can get that question answered? That'd be great. She'll clarify that for us. So while she's doing that, but yeah, so it is very different. We were talking about the chart that you have earlier in the on the website, and how that is very common among Protestant, European Protestant countries.
Yeah. So the chart that is being referred to here is the one where we have the two oldest sons are typically named after the two grandfathers, and then the two oldest daughters named after the two grandmothers. And that is very much a Northern European Protestant Europe naming pattern. And I love that because
Oops. Hang on, you froze again.
Things that help the puzzle of this family.
You froze again. Can you repeat that for me? That's all right.
Yeah. How far back do I need to go?
Answering the question, I think.
Okay, we'll just start over.
Start over with that whole thing.
Okay, great. So we have the table that was being referred to. The first two, the oldest sons, are typically named after the two grandfathers. The oldest daughters are typically named after the grandmothers. And then the subsequent children after that would be aunts, uncles, whatever, somebody else important to the family. But you do see that across generations. And I love that because in Scandinavia, we don't have a lot of variety in given names. So when you can see that these oldest children have the grandparents' names, it helps lock in that you have the right family group.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. It does. Yeah. It does. I've seen that in the in my US based research, where that very similar, that Protestant European, because think of who came over and settled America.
Exactly.
But I don't always see it as consistent and as strong as I might have seen it in European based records or have heard from other researchers. That it can be a little more fluid as to how they do it with that. The other thing I find is that when you're using a naming pattern like that, where the first two sons might be named after the grandparents or the grandfathers, if one of those children dies, whether as a child or as an adult, then it really can skew. You might not recognize the naming pattern.
Correct.
So it's important to make sure when a researcher needs to find all of the children in order to be able to utilize that naming pattern and be comfortable with it. But you brought up a good point, and you can expound on that a little bit more about when a child dies young, before they reach adulthood, that they will sometimes reuse the name.
I wanted to bring that up. Yeah. In fact, not sometimes, it almost always you see that name being reused. So you might have a family where there's 3 little girls named Anna all in a row. That's a good indication that those older children, or the ones born first, probably died before the others came around, and they did reuse those names. And another interesting thing that I have found, and I've asked other researchers about this, and they have confirmed that when you have, let's say, a husband and wife, and the husband passes away, the wife remarries and has a son with that second husband, that son would be named after the first husband.
That one I was not aware of. Is that again the Northern European?
I think that tradition? I've seen that all through Scandinavia. I can't say if it would hold out through Germany and whatever, but it's an really interesting puzzle to see.
That would be.
Yeah.
Oh, I have one that would really help me out on if I just knew.
Isn't that great? And they give you all these hints along the way of who you need to be looking for.
I think, yeah, and I think you're right using the word hence, because we do have to be careful, because as people passed away, or if it got skewed by any stretch of the imagination, there is as life events happened, that could absolutely be cause us to misinterpret what the records show. But yes, I know I've had a number of folks ask me and email me over the years about that. I've been researching, did they ever reuse the name of a deceased child? And I'm like, absolutely.
All the time. Yes.
All the time, as a way to remember that too. So, okay. So Debbie clarified that thing. She said, okay, let me go back down to here. So Debbie we were talking about the patronymic name and the change over from in the mid 1800s to more traditional naming patterns as we know them. And she had to follow a family from one parish to another. So the original question had to do with when the family exits and enters different parishes, would their name have been, I think what she's asking is, would the name have been, what name to look at, I guess, when you're thinking about what pattern would they have been under. I guess it could vary depending on what child was born.
Sure, but you wouldn't see it change from parish to parish. It seems that once a surname is given at the time of birth, that's usually what goes about. Now, one thing that we need to be aware of in Scandinavia, though, is that they have these additions of other names, like a farm name or some kind of a occupational name, something to help clarify which Hans men about the same age having children at the same time. And even though it's confusing for us, it was confusing for the parish priest and the clerk at that time too. So he might say like Hans Jensen Lundquist to remember what farm they came from. And that farm name can stick with the family for generations, or maybe even just for one generation. So we have all these different names that we have to consider.
So when they would have, say, like a farm name or a location name added, when you're documenting in like your family tree, is that the surname that you're using at that point?
I get that question a lot. So I always, in my family tree software, I will put the name as it appeared in the christening record. So the first record that I have for that person. But then I will make a note that this surname is tacked on, or they were also known as these names, and be aware of that. And in my notes list, does that make sense?
It does. Say that last bit. From what I understand, you said you use it as they were done on their christening record, but you make a note on your tree to indicate more other names that they might have gone by or known by.
Yes.
So that does make sense. Yes. Absolutely. And that's actually a good thing, because I don't know if this happened in Scandinavia, but lately I've been getting a lot of questions about people who've changed their name out of the blue. Yes. That seems to be happening quite a bit in the US or America when they were researching. It has nothing to do with naming patterns. I have no idea sometimes why the men choose what they choose, but I know I've had a number of issues in my own family, and other readers have mentioned the same thing. But another thing, I see this seems to be individual to families, but I have one family line or a couple that actually they have the traditional names that we know, like Stephen, Caswell, Haley. So the traditional first, middle, last name. But this family almost always goes by the individual by their middle names. And that's been a real interesting, I don't know why that happens, but I think that's something, if you're looking at naming patterns, you might need to, at least in the US, oops, I lost Jenny. You might need to recognize if you're researching and they have if they're using a middle name, because that first name could be coming off of the maybe they were named for the paternal grandfather, but they're going by their middle name. So you've got to make sure that you understand that you've got a middle name. So it is important to kind of dig a little deeper on some of these and recognize if you're working with first names or middle names and that kind of thing when you're pulling those naming patterns out, per se. So,
mentioning someone going by a middle name common in Scandinavia, you'll see them called by whatever that first name is. That's what they will be known as. But I would like to kind of circle back to this idea of the alternative, for lack of a better word, I guess, alternative surnames.
mm-hmm,
Excuse me. So in that 1850-ish time period when the surnames became a little bit more stable, especially in Norway and Sweden, we start seeing these farm names and occupational surnames become the name that the family hangs on to.
mm-hmm.
So they may not have always stuck with a patronymic surname. At that point in time, they could have just stuck with a farm name.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That
and I
makes
think
sense.
that's an important an important point of clarification for all those looking in those other countries.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That really does. So Debbie had another question. She said she has an ancestor named Lena, was one of 13 children, and was given away as a maid. She then had a child, and the father was not at hand. That's in quotes. So
Mm-hmm.
she gave the son her own last name. Was
Yes.
that common?
Yes, that is common.
Okay.
I see that very often. So hopefully everyone understands that illegitimate children were very common. That's nothing to be scared off by or to be intimidated by or think is scandalous. It's very normal. And a lot of times that couple would stay together and end up being married. A lot of times in the christening records, the father's name will be listed, or it will say the father is supposedly this person.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it won't even give the father's name, though.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it has the supposed father's name there, if the couple didn't stay together, I frequently see the mother's surname being used with
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that.
the child.
I see that in U.S. records too. Very
Yeah.
similar, where for illegitimacy, typically they took the mother's maiden name,
Yes.
unless even if the father was known. But if the father, but not always, if the father was known and if the father accepted the child as his responsibility, then he may have taken the father's name. So,
Correct.
yeah, that's
Yes.
a good point. It's really interesting to kind of delve into that whole topic of names and
It is.
where they came from and which name. Because I think as I know as when I was a new researcher, I really probably missed some very vital clues based on naming patterns or what I was seeing in the records, just how somebody was named. That now I actually can pick up on and to see. And you know, I'm sure I just had to kind of go back and redo some things because I missed those clues the first time around. So if for those of you who don't have, if you have Scandinavian naming pattern, you know, check out the latest post. But if you're researching a different ethnicity, maybe just a different culture altogether, here's how you can actually just Google and find some of those naming patterns. So, for instance, if you're researching your Irish ancestors and you want to find maybe if there's some Irish naming patterns or maybe Irish naming patterns within the Catholic Church, you can just Google that. Just put in whatever country you're researching or whatever ethnic group, and then just use the terms naming patterns.
Yes.
And you will you can go through those results to find. You can do German naming patterns. English naming patterns, all that kind of thing that you can go through as well. So
yeah. And I think I just have two comments to make. First of all, I think this is a concept that we've really moved over time. The name that we really stick to these days.
Can I, excuse me, Jay, you cut out again. Can I get you just to start that section over, that part over again? Thank you.
Sure. I was just making the comment that naming patterns are something we've kind of moved away from today. That our ancestors really did name their children were after somebody else. Like you didn't see these unique names just coming in like we do today. You know, I have 4 children. They all have middle names that are significant, but their given names are just names we like. And I think that's far more common today. The other comment that I wanted to make is, as much as we talk about these patterns and the cultural rules behind naming, there's always exceptions. So just because your family doesn't fall into these patterns, it doesn't mean that you're doing things wrong. It just is, these are a good hint when we're trying to put together the puzzle of who our family is.
That's a very good point.
It's kind of the way
Oh, and we are losing Jenny again. Uh-oh.
I'm losing you too.
Oh no. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up. I don't know quite what's going
Okay.
on. It's interesting, guys. I do apologize for a little bit of the glitchiness on this today. I've had more tech issues in the past week than I've had in the last 6 months. I honestly, the little gremlins, and I even know I was talking to another genealogy researcher friend today. We were doing something together, and she's like, "You're not going to believe the tech issues I've been having." So I don't know what's going on. It's in the air as at a full moon. But thank you guys for sticking with us. I will be putting a link to Jenny's website in the comments below, so you guys can check that out. Learn more about those naming patterns. Feel free if you haven't read the post this week on naming patterns, go ahead and hop over there and take a look at it. There's some really great information in there, and you can see a little bit more of what we've talked about. Oh, Debbie has one last question. She said, could you ever find out the family name of the father not at hand? Does that go by not if they're, I guess if they're not in that christening record, if they don't.
Yes, if they're not listed, then that's when we are just out of luck. If they're listed in there, then you have a chance.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it might say Jens Jensen was the father. Well, there could be 10 Jens Jensens anywhere in the area. So it's really tricky. If they don't give you more identifying information, you might just be out of luck.
Yeah, that's hard. It's hard on US-based researchers as well.
Yeah.
Trying to find that, definitely. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jenny, for joining us. I'd love to have you sometime again in the future as well.
Thank you. Anytime.
You are welcome. All right, guys. We will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.